Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I think we've got quite a few people on the call. I'm guessing people will probably join as they're grabbing their lunch, so welcome. Today's session is called Planning for People, How Community Engagement Can Transform Project Delivery. My name is Nicola Kane. I'm a director at Steer and lead the development of our North of England business. And in a moment, I'll introduce you to my co-speaker, Dr. Felicity Heathcote-Marcz, who's director at Bear Analysis. But before I do, just a quick reminder that this webinar is recorded and everyone registered will receive a link afterwards. So do feel free to share it with your colleagues if you found it useful. I hope you do find it insightful and it will help you shape your day-to-day delivery. And today's conversation really builds on the momentum from the Local Transport Summit, which Steer sponsored a couple of weeks ago. And both Felicity and I spoke at that, coming from different perspectives around more human-centred project development and delivery. And I think a strong message came out through that whole summit that effective transport delivery isn't just about infrastructure and services, it's really about people and how you involve people in shaping plans and priorities. And I think that's particularly important as we help provide senior officers, elected members, mayors, the confidence that they're implementing improvements that have strong public support and that will meet the needs of people from all parts of the communities they serve. So the session today is going to be a conversation between me and Felicity. We've got a few slides, but really it's going to be a conversation about our experience of working together and separately on developing people-led plans and projects. We're going to be chatting for about maybe 40-45 minutes, and then we should have some time at the end for questions. So do use the chat function. Drop those questions in through the session and we'll allow some time to take some of those. So yeah, looking forward to hearing your views and feedback. So as I mentioned, I've got Felicity here with me today. We've been working together on quite a few projects across the country and building a really strong collaboration about which is really embedding engagement and participation in the projects that we're working on together, including a new city centre access and movement plan for Sheffield City Council, which recently won a CIHT EDI award, which we're delighted about. So Felicity, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and then we'll get into the conversation?
Thanks very much, Nicola. Hi, everyone. Really delighted to be here today to talk to you about planning for people, very much an important topic. So I, as Nicola's mentioned, run Bear Analysis. We are a research and insights consultancy, and our specialism is bringing together expert freelancers or associates into what I like to call rainbow teams. So collaborating with different kinds of researchers, different kinds of immersive community engagement specialists, and others who can make sure that we're delivering the best possible outcomes for our clients. We mostly work in transportation, in infrastructure and defence, and we've certainly seen that a desire and a requirement really to put people at the centre of planning, of design, of building projects is becoming more and more vital for successful project outcomes. So very much looking forward to the conversation today.
That's brilliant. So before we dive into a couple of kind of case studies where we've worked together, just wanted to kind of kickstart the conversation, Felicity, about maybe how things have moved. Well, certainly since my career, I've been working for nearly 25 years now, which is quite frightening. But the shift in my career kind of from, very technically led, probably quite engineering led solutions to really putting people at the heart of what we do, and maybe a move from thinking that people behave in a very rational way to realizing that people's behavior is shaped by a whole range of things: their values, their culture, their experience, their gender, their kind of wider background, that rather than being making decisions in a very rational way. So it'd be quite interested to hear your perspective, Felicity, on how you think our profession is refocusing itself around the needs of people and how that's starting to reflect in the sort of work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely, Nicola. I think it is interesting indeed, this turn towards the human in planning and in building and infrastructure projects. I think transport has historically been a little bit behind the curve on some of these moves than, for example, house builders or kind of development kinds of projects. And that's for a variety of historical reasons and sort of business case reasons, but certainly in the past few years since I've been working in the transport space, have absolutely seen the human-centered approach becoming more and more normalized and more embedded in project delivery. And as you say, it's become even now for engineering teams, for kind of big data and hard data teams, more important. And there's more of an awareness that we need to go out, we need to engage with people, we need to bring communities with us when we're creating projects, when we're building new stuff out there, and that things need to work for people. I was reading a great book recently called the City is a Dying Thing. I've got it over here. If anyone's read it, Des Fitzgerald's book, which is interesting in that it sort of talks about the greening of the city and the turn towards the greening of the city, but how it's maybe become a little bit anti-humanist. It's kind of, let's get rid of the humans from these cities and these urban conurbations and like make it all green and lovely. But actually what we really need is to make sure that cities and places that we live are fit for humans, and that we can create spaces that work for really different diverse kinds of communities. And the first way of doing that, I think, from our point of view, is to engage with people and make sure we know who's out there, who we're engaging for, and that we're not kind of building and creating things for an assumed audience, but we're actually going and talking to real people, bringing them with us. So yes, I've certainly seen some interesting turns towards that, and it's great that it's becoming so normalized in our industry, I think.
That's brilliant. And I've certainly seen, kind of working with different clients since coming back into consultancy a few years ago, that you can get very different outcomes depending on how you engage, and how open clients are to really kind of engaging early and throughout. And I think sometimes there's a feeling that engagement is quite time consuming, quite expensive, but I think in my experience, you might get through the first few stages a bit more quickly, but actually you tend to come a cropper further on in the project if you haven't done that engagement well. And I think we can probably all think of kind of quite a number of high profile projects and maybe have hit the buffers, if you like, because they haven't engaged well and throughout a project. So I think it's absolutely essential. I think there are some pitfalls, aren't there, that maybe people can fall into. Certainly I've seen kind of a nervousness around maybe engaging because it possibly raises expectations, possibly worries about backlash or misunderstanding if you engage too early when you're not very clear on what you're doing. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen, or kind of where engagement isn't done as well as it might be?
Yeah, definitely, Nicola. I agree. There are certainly pitfalls that seem to come up again and again in the transport planning kind of infrastructure projects. I think certainly one that I see often is more surface level engagement, where it's assumed that if we do a survey, if we engage in terms of one methodology, that will give us the data we need. Particularly, I think there can be a bit of technology fetishism, perhaps. It's like we're using AI or using a great new tool and getting loads of data, but data's data, right? We need to be able to translate that into insight, and to really understand what's that telling us about real people, about real communities, community needs analysis. Often there's not necessarily a shortcut for doing that. We do need to understand real voices, and we do need to sample correctly, and all the things we'll be talking about a bit later on in this webinar. But I think, yes, as you say, there's sort of two sides to that coin of the risks. There's the side of, we could engage too much, and that could raise expectations, and we could then sort of alienate people if we don't do what they want us to do. particularly I think political stakeholders, as you say, can fall into that. But on the other hand, if we're engaging at too much of a surface level and not really doing things in a we'll talk about later, like triangulated way, and sort of doing a deeper dive, then we risk making decisions, including investment decisions, spending quite a lot of money on things and on strategies that might not necessarily be the right thing, or might leave people more alienated or more left behind, because we haven't spent the time really understanding that embodied experience of different stakeholder groups.
I think we've all probably seen examples of where that maybe that effort to find those lesser heard voices isn't made, and so plans and projects can be dominated by those stakeholders who are better able to make their voice heard, and maybe the vocal minority. Who might be supportive of what you're trying to do and really pushing it through, or might be actually really trying to undermine it. So I think, again, that's a good reason to kind of engage as broadly and deeply as you can. So maybe we can just very briefly touch on kind of what good looks like. We'll come back to this through the rest of the conversation. What are your thoughts about kind of some high-level principles that we should be trying to adopt as we do more effective engagement through our projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on one there already, Nicola, in terms of making sure that we're including those traditionally lesser heard voices, maybe called harder to reach voices, or harder to hear, because we're not necessarily listening in the right ways. And as we've mentioned, the risks of excluding those voices, or not making the efforts to go and find those voices, is that our data is biased, basically. So it's kind of dominated by the usual suspects, we might call them. So people who might already be quite engaged in their local community group or their Facebook group, and who are already responding to public consultations, or who are already out there writing to their counsellor, which is fine. We want to hear from those people, but the vast majority, the silent majority, are not doing those things. They're not just going to be there ready to be engaged with. We've got to make the effort to go out there and find them and understand them, and understand their priorities and what makes them tick, and what might be a priority for them to have safer journeys, or better journeys, or an improved quality of life, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I think certainly going out there and doing that right. First of all, sampling work. Again, we'll talk about some of these things in a bit more detail for the audience later. But making sure you've got the right sampling frame, making sure you're going out and speaking to enough people of those right groups, and then also, again, I'll touch on this later, but the lovely triangle, as I like to call it, triangulating our results. So not just thinking, oh, it's okay, we'll do a Survey Monkey, or we'll do some traditional public consultation dropping in a library. And that's kind of it, because there's so much there, there's so much nuance that we'll probably miss out on, and there's so many different parts of the community who won't be engaged in those ways, who if we're ignoring them, like you say, we'll be ignoring a big part of that picture, and potentially advocates, or people who would be very supportive of a new intervention, but we're not necessarily collecting those views. So yes, I think those are probably a couple of things there.
That's brilliant. And I've also seen kind of really powerful use of big open questions about kind of what people would like the future to be like. But, very early on in the project can really sometimes surprise you, actually, with the things that people come back with. And it's really helpful in terms of building kind of political confidence that you're doing the right things that people actually want to see. So yeah, I would really sort of encourage involving people as much as possible in that kind of early visioning stage, and really getting a sense of what people would like to see, even if you're not quite sure how you might deliver it. And I guess that's our role as professionals, is to turn those kind of insights into sort of practical solutions. But open questions, although they can be a bit scary, I think it's really, really important.
Completely agree. I guess that's key in co-design, isn't it? In some of the projects that we've run together over the last sort of year, 18 months, that's been an important piece, whether we're doing it with deliberative sort of style workshops, like those open-ended questions, or trying to, you know, go and do more immersive work and bring back kind of insights so that we can co-create. It's, you know, it's so important now. And if we're talking about being human-centered, it shouldn't be, you know, a design or a strategy done to people. It needs to be done with people and with, you know, that kind of co-creation from the outset. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. So should we dive into our first case study?
Yeah.
Bring up some slides. Brilliant. So we wanted to talk about a project which is kind of a big one that Felicity and I have been working on together for well over a year now, nearly 18 months actually, which has been a brilliant piece of work with Sheffield City Council and with their members. So we worked with a cross-party committee of elected members, their Transport, Regeneration and Climate Policy Committee. Initially actually worked with them very closely to develop a vision for Sheffield, for the whole of Sheffield, around transport, which was giving members something that they could really kind of champion and talk to their communities about. And we did that quickly, but very, very collaboratively, and built a kind of, you know, good working relationship with members and senior officers at the City Council. And that then moved into us being commissioned to develop a more detailed plan for the city centre, which was really designed to support very significant growth that's planned in the city centre, potentially 20,000 new homes being delivered over the next 15 years. So really big growth agenda, which will totally transform the city centre. And this work was to help try and give more clarity on what's needed from an access and movement perspective across all modes, and was designed not to just be a kind of vision document, but a really practical document which can be moved into delivery as quickly as possible. So really helping to shape the City Council's delivery programme over the next 10 to 20 years. So that was kind of the sort of context of the work. And we used engagement throughout and working with Felicity and her team to shape the vision, to really start to test trade-offs, sort of recognising that you can't do everything. There's finite road space, there's finite funding. How do we make those trade-offs based on, you know, really clear public, community, business feedback, and to make sure we're really focusing on the most critical issues for all members of society. And I think this is a really great case study because I think the engagement work that we did really massively improved the quality of the plan, its robustness, its responsiveness to the needs of different people in Sheffield, but also the acceptability of the plan. And actually the plan making process, I think, has been much smoother as a result of this in-depth engagement that we've done. So I think the next slide just sort of talks a little bit about some of the broader conversation work we did. We started the engagement from, I think I can move this on, can't I? Yeah. So we started off with, I suppose, a combination of lots of different engagement tools and techniques. So some of the more kind of traditional type conversation engagement. We did run an online survey to try and to enable as many people as possible to participate. We ran lots of drop-in sessions. We use those in a very interactive way to kind of get people's feedback on how much space we should give to different sorts of modes. We use lots of mapping tools to start to identify where there were particular issues within the city centre, and really spent a lot of time before we'd done any kind of detailed technical work to get lots of different views, and at that point Felicity supported us with some more in-depth focus groups, and also some ethnographic research. So I don't know, Felicity, do you want to talk us through a little bit about the work you did at this stage?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So people can see on screen here just one of the images that the team took from an accompanied journey. So we ran 10, it might be slightly more than 10 accompanied journeys with participants who were specifically recruited to reflect a diverse range of access needs, transport mode use, and demographics, so that we could deep dive and kind of understand specific kinds of journeys that maybe we didn't have so much information about, and we were really quite curious about how certain kinds of people were moving through Sheffield city centre. So all names in the deck are pseudonyms, by the way, but you can see here we've got Millie, who was an adapted cyclist user and had a disability, and she loved using her cycle. We've got some great kind of quotes from her, but unfortunately she was unable to access certain parts of Sheffield city centre. So we can see here there are only stairs up to Arundel Gate, so it's sort of the end of her road here, which is a sort of main thoroughfare, if you like, for pedestrians, and you've got the bus interchange all around here in Sheffield city centre. So there were some really interesting areas that we identified just by walking alongside people that we could see really needed some significant access and movement improvements. So that's one of the benefits really of doing that kind of immersive, more ethnographic research with research participants, and getting that sampling right, recruiting the right kinds of people to do those accompanied journeys with, because as researchers we're getting a real embodied understanding of what's it really like for this person to be transversing the city, to be accessing certain areas, or to be locked out of certain areas, and for that lack of access to be there, what does that mean for them? So and what alternatives can they use? So Millie's journey was particularly interesting, and like I say, we did about 10 of these journeys with different kinds of people. If we go to the next slide, please. I think there's the nice quote there from Millie as well, saying she doesn't feel safe in certain areas, but how the tricycle gives her wings, as she talked about it. She wishes she could keep it forever. It was actually a lending program by a charity in Sheffield, who just don't have enough for the demand. There's a lot of demand to have these from those who struggle with certain access requirements across the city. So there's a great, again, potential there for more journeys to be made if we can find accessible transport for these individuals.
And these kind of individual stories and quotes they're so powerful, aren't they, in terms of influencing decision makers and bringing completely different perspectives into the work we're doing as planners.
Very much, yeah. No, thanks, Nicola. I absolutely think so. And I know we're doing some work at the moment on a different project we're not talking about today, but where we're also using ethnographic filmmaking to, and video to bring that to life. But absolutely, it can really help, persuade and, help more political decision makers to understand those realities and help them see the potential benefits of investment in certain interventions. And then this is just another example here where we've got somebody who's able-bodied, quite a young kind of male, in an underpass which had been identified as somewhere a lot of people, particularly women, didn't want to go, didn't want to walk down, didn't want to cycle. And even this individual sort of talked about how they'd stopped cycling because of safety concerns, not just in this area, but generally across certain key routes, certain key access routes in Sheffield. And so, again, it was very interesting for us, if we're identifying, these kinds of personas as stopping cycling or too fearful to cycle. What about cautious cyclists? What about women? What about children? It's really important for us to kind of fix these bigger feelings of safety. And if we go on to the next slide, we'll also see a collection of metaphors, because a lot of the participants that we spoke to, they would speak in quite rich and imaginative ways, and we were able to record some of these metaphors that people thought about the city. What does the city mean to you? What would you like to see for the future of your city? So whether it's the Polar Mint, where we've got so much going on the outside, but it feels empty in the centre, or the amphitheatre, where because Sheffield's kind of built on these hills, it's difficult to access because you've got the steepness of kind of going out of the centre and difficult to cycle. The satellite, the mess, really quite interesting how these metaphors were repeated, and again, it can tell us something, I think, as planners and as people kind of making decisions about the city centre. And then finally, I think we've got another slide just summing up the key finding that we identified actually from our engagement, which was a little bit unexpected, but it was around safety. And again, that for all groups that we spoke to, not just women, but particularly for kind of women and younger people and those who were LGBTQ plus as well, for example, that safety was a key reason they weren't making certain journeys. If we could make transport, particularly public transport, feel safer and active travel, then they would be much more likely to make journeys, nighttime economy journeys in particular. We did, as this slide shows, also engage with the refugee community, which was another sort of harder to hear traditionally group in Sheffield and in lots of places. But altogether, we did 9 focus groups, and I think just over 10 of these accompanied journeys, as well as some interviews with sort of business leaders and other kinds of leaders in the city. And we certainly found that by collating those key themes, we were able to support the team at Sheffield City Council see what the priorities really were for the majority of their residents, across a key broad set of their demographics of residents and visitors, as well, mostly residents across Sheffield, who were travelling into the city centre. So yeah, absolutely. As we've said, these kinds of quotes and that kind of richness can really help our kinds of projects to make decisions, and to decide on next steps with a really rich evidence base behind them.
That's great. Thank you, Felicity. And all of those insights, including all the feedback from the surveys and the drop-in sessions that we ran, really helped us to kind of get a clear idea on where some of the priorities lay, and with a really sort of strong focus on how can we make the city centre more walkable. That came out kind of strongly across all of the groups who engaged with, and also a really strong focus on better public transport, and buses in particular came out very strongly as a mode that people wanted to be able to use more and wanted them to be given adequate space and kind of good access to the core of the city centre, and with good reliability right into the evening. So those gave us a lot more confidence in terms of the sorts of interventions we were developing. And as Felicity said, safety came out very strongly as a key theme, and wanting to feel safe, particularly after dark. So again, that really fed into our proposals. So the access and movement plan went out to consultation. The draft plan went out to consultation this summer, is now going through its sort of final iteration. But I think because we had done all that really strong engagement, and we'd worked very closely with members and senior officers through the whole process, it felt like that sort of first formal consultation went very smoothly, because people understood the rationale for why the plan was being developed in the way that it had, and could see that we'd built the plan on an awful lot of deep and broad conversations with people from right across the city. So that was our first example. Our second one is a little bit different. So we've also been working with Bear Analysis in London on a school streets project, where we needed to do some much deeper engagement with a religious community who were a little bit hard to engage with, and so we had to come up with some quite innovative ways of communicating with them in a way that they felt they were, properly involved in the project, and to help shape proposals which met their needs. So this involved kind of working through a representative from that community. And I think this is a really important lesson for us to learn, that having somebody who's already very trusted in that community is really, really important. So I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about this project, Felicity? It's another very, very powerful case study.
Yeah, sure, Nicola. So indeed, this is quite different from the last project. This was a project that required much deeper, more thoughtful engagement with a very specific, traditionally closed community. So it was difficult to access for a variety of reasons, and they hadn't had the most open communication with the client to date. So it was really important when they came to us that we did identify the right trusted research resource from within that community to go and do that work. And again, I think, going back to potential pitfalls of engagement and research, I think sometimes, research in general has a bit of a representation problem. It's a lot of white middle class people often doing this work, from the same kinds of backgrounds and communities. But actually, in order to get the best kinds of outcomes and outputs, it's really more important than ever to be doing what we might call peer research or community training to both identify the right resource within those communities who have already got access. They've already they might already be a gatekeeper to certain people that we want to speak to, but also they speak the language, as it were. They've got that understanding, they've got that context. It's much easier, less time consuming. You're much more likely to get really good results by using those kinds of resources to do the research for you and with you. So again, it becomes much more co-creative rather than a case of, we're the consultancy team, we kind of know best, we're going to go do the work, on this community. Because there's so much that we don't know, we don't understand about certain closed community groups. So by using the Bear Analysis Network and identifying a really fantastic resource who was already working in a set of religious schools in London, we were able to provide some training to make sure they were kind of happy to paid living wage, engaging with us as a researcher for this project, and then supporting them with creating a research guide, and then going in and doing some interviews with school leaders from these communities, so head teachers or kind of HR leads, that kind of thing. And again, because this person already had this great access, they were then able to peer refer another peer who was working at a set of boys' schools, because in this community you've got boys and girls who are educated differently. So we were able to hit our full sample that the client was interested in. So a full set of kind of closed religious schools via these two fantastic community researchers. And we got some, again, great data and insights that wouldn't have been otherwise available to the kind of consultancy research team or to the end client who had been trying to do this engagement for quite some time and not really getting anywhere with the groups. So as well as that, we did triangulate. So we also did some ethnography. We did some street ethnography and observations with 3 researchers at several areas across London where these different schools were located at peak times. So we really wanted to understand in certain areas where school streets had been embedded already, and certain areas where there was discussion about them being embedded, what were the current pain points, what were the issues, in reality, what's going on at the school gates during those kind of drop off and pick up times. And you can just see here on the screen some images from our final report that kind of represent some of those issues. So we had a lot of kind of double yellow line parking by these vans or vans that the community drive around to pick up and drop off children. We had quite a lot of crossings that were not in the best condition, shall we say, and there was also some defacement of signage as well to do with the school street program, which again we found quite interesting ethnographically. What does that represent, this sort of strength of feeling amongst some community members about the school streets. So, and again, by doing that street ethnography and observation and speaking to community members, parents, older sort of children, like in kind of colleges, as well as some security guards as well who worked at these schools. We were really able to build up a much richer picture in terms of why this community or different parts of the community didn't want to engage directly with our client, what they might like to do instead in terms of road safety interventions for their school children, and sort of feed that back in a final report. And again, we talked a lot about co-creation would be a great next step with this community. But again, I don't know if you want to pick up on that as well, Nicola.
Yeah, so I think it's a fantastic example of how you do work directly with trusted people already in that community. But my understanding is that actually the insights that were gleaned from that research have really shaped how the programme of activity is now being taken forward. So rather than maybe a whole area-wide school streets type intervention, that they're focusing much more on kind of specific smaller scale projects actually, which have come directly from that feedback, which should build kind of buy-in and acceptability of the project, and much more targeted intervention, which I think is a really powerful outcome, that actually that insight has really changed the client's view on what's the right approach in this particular area, and to make sure it's as kind of useful and relevant to the communities that are accessing those schools. So I think this is a brilliant example of how insight is really shaping delivery in a very targeted and specific way. Okay, so time is ticking away, Felicity. We've got about 10 minutes left. We wanted to end with a few kind of insights, sort of top tips, if you like, of things to think about when you're designing a really impactful engagement programme. And then hopefully we'll still have 10-15 minutes left at the end to take questions. So if we could bring the slides back up, David. And I will move on. So let's let's get through our top tips for good engagement. Do you want to kick off with sampling?
Nice, thanks, Nicola. Yes, back to this bugbear of mine around sampling, which I've already mentioned a few times on this call. But I think it can't be mentioned enough. Really, it really is key. It's a huge pitfall, again, that I think both of us have seen several times in our careers, where engagement is kind of started and it's, maybe there's not so much time. So clients think, let's just get going. We'll, get a SurveyMonkey out. We'll get started without necessarily thinking about, okay, who is our target population? What's the sample frame? What kind of numbers do we need for this engagement to actually be meaningful? Who are we missing out on here? What are some of the key voices who maybe haven't been represented in the past? Where have we got data gaps? So it doesn't necessarily need to take a long time, but by planning some of that up front in our projects, and making sure we're starting out on the right foot with the right kind of understanding the right numbers of people we need and who they are, in terms of our qualitative and quantitative, should we say, engagement. It really pays dividends at the end, because we can then say at the end of our projects, we've got a really strong evidence base here, and we know that these results are either generalizable or reliable. If it's a qualitative sample, if it's just 20-30 people, that's fine. As long as we're triangulating on that as well. And I think there's another slide with the triangle on it. But if there's anything you want to also add in as well, Nicola, on this.
No, I think I think this Sheffield example was a great example of how we use lots of different methods, and brought them all together to really get that sort of breadth and depth, and a really sort of robust approach to recruitment of things like the focus groups and so on, to make sure we'd really reached as many different voices and people as possible from right across the city. So I think although it is a little bit more time consuming and maybe a little bit of cost up front, I think it's really worth worth the effort and the time. I think it really sort of showed its value in the work we did in Sheffield.
Definitely, yes, absolutely. And moving on to this next one about getting the right research team. First of all, also we need to get the right recruitment team involved, and that might mean, as you say, some additional cost if we're going to professional recruiters who we know have got the right kinds of either online panels or the right access into communities. So I think that's, again, really important. Bear works with quite a broad range of different professional participant recruiters, third sector organisations or charities, and other kinds of gatekeepers in order to get that right. But then also, as we've talked about with our religious schools example, that right research team is so important. Again, it's a bit of a pitfall to think we can use the same research team again and again, across any project, because there'll be a lot that we're, kind of missing out on, and we might not be picking up on the sensitivities of certain communities, or again, certain voices may not feel empowered to speak up if they're not speaking to people who feel like them, look like them, etc. So that again, representation point, I think, is very important in the research that we do, and I think, again, from the various projects that we've done together over the past few months, we can see some examples of that, can't we?
Yeah, that's great. I think maybe sometimes there's transport or planning professionals who think we have to do it all ourselves, and I think getting the right people to lead that engagement and the right sort of facilitators who can give you direct access to different communities is really, really important. Those people have already built that trust, so I think that's a much more effective way of having really meaningful conversations with people. So yeah, I totally agree. Let's move on to the next one. Oh yes, we'll just do a survey.
Nice. We'll just do a survey. I think I've already said this. It's like one of my bingo cards in this call. But again, the risk of that more surface level engagement, the risk of assuming that big data can provide us with the insight, and the risk of that. If we go on to the next slide, you've got the lovely triangle, I think. Yes, love it. It's my favorite. So if we are going to do really good best practice engagement, really we should be triangulating. So it's not just, we won't just do one thing, we won't do two things, we'll do three methods. Think triangle, and by doing that, again, we make sure whatever project we're doing, we will end up with a rigorous set of outcomes that you can really base, whether it's policy or next steps for a access and movement strategy, but you can really base your next steps on those with confidence, knowing that you're going to be making decisions that have the backing of insight, not just kind of data, but we don't really know what that data is saying. So
yeah, I think that's really powerful. We've talked a lot about ethnography today, Felicity. Not everyone might know exactly what that means. Do you want to, I know this is your kind of area of expertise, do you want to just talk a little bit about using ethnographic techniques and maybe some of the different techniques within that category?
Yes, good point, Nicola. Absolutely. So as we've spoken about, ethnography is a kind of foundation keystone of the work that Bear Analysis does, not only with Steer, but with our other clients as well. So ethnography, writing culture, literally, like ethnography, and basically it's a technique that comes from anthropology. It's a more immersive way of understanding cultures, of understanding how people interact with other people, but also, in our context, infrastructures, technologies, and understanding, in a deeper way, what those interactions mean and how they could potentially be changed as well. So it works really nicely, I think, with behaviour change techniques as well, which some of our audience might be more familiar with, nudge tactics, all of that. But ethnography is a really great way of getting at what really is the pain point, what can we really understand about what's going on out there right now in the field. And as we can see on the screen here, we've just got some key bullet points that sum up the types of methods. So, shadowing individuals. So there's accompanied journeys that we talked about, walking in the shoes of a research participant to understand what's it really like for their embodied experience of a journey. In context interviews, so not sort of taking people out into a workshop environment or doing a Teams interview, but actually talking to people while they're, again, for transport, on their journey. And what people remember and recall is very different from what they will tell you in the moment when they are, again, some of the work that Steer and Bear have done this year, at a bus stop, for example, and sort of talking through their interactions, step by step. And then participant observation, again, some of you might have heard about this from the behaviour change sort of discourse, but the say-do gap. So again, what people might say they do in a survey, it's really different from what they actually do in reality. And by using some participant observation, we can identify that. And with ethnography, you also get, as we've seen some today of these today, really rich kind of visual research as well. You'll get the pictures, you get video. It brings those stories to life in a way that isn't possible with a survey or with kind of other kinds of techniques. Obviously, it's a moment in time. It's quite time-bound data, unless you're doing big longitudinal ethnographic projects, but often in our kind of commercial world, we're not doing that. But it's also a very reflexive approach. So I really value the way it makes the method makes me think and makes my team think about, what are we doing as researchers? How are we feeling? Are we feeling safe in a particular space? Are we feeling, comfortable? So you've kind of got to take that into account as well, and make sure that that's also recorded in your data. I hope that's a useful snapshot for anyone that is not aware of ethnography.
That's brilliant. I think there's possibly a question asking a bit more detail about focus groups and how we recruited for those, and perhaps we'll come back to that in a second. So that's been a really good chat. The time has flown by.
It has.
I guess perhaps if we just finish with a few kind of final takeaways. So I don't know if you've got three kind of top things that you'd like people to take away from this conversation, Felicity.
Yes, the triangle, please, people, remember the triangle. Yes, if you're going to commission research, or if you're sort of thinking about doing engagement, no matter what kind of method, the triangle, try and engage with your community, your stakeholders in 3 different kinds of ways, because then if you're finding differences across those 3, that's where that's what's interesting. That's where you need to dive deeper. That's where you need to be careful before you start making a decision based on 70% of people said this in a survey. It's like, we need to really make sure that that's right. Other things, I think, be mindful of the team, as we've talked about. Best athlete approach, or as we call it in Bay, the best rainbow team. So finding those correct experts to go and help you do that engagement, really important. Stronger together, stronger with broader teams. And then finally, I think making sure that again that sampling is done up front. So again, you've got yourself covered at the end of a project, and you're not thinking, oh no, we missed out on X and Y voices, or X and Y stakeholders are annoyed because we haven't engaged with them. But we're actually planning our sampling up front and doing that justice.
Brilliant, that's great. And I guess from my perspective, I think having that engagement really early to help kind of co-design your vision for a project, a plan, a strategy is massively beneficial, and helps to inform those difficult trade-offs that we all have to make in shaping our projects. So I would definitely encourage very early engagement before you've already come to conclusions about the sorts of things you might want to do. I think effective engagement really helps to build trust and legitimacy. It helps to build trust with your, particularly with your political masters and senior officers, that you're doing the right sorts of things, and there'll be sort of, if not strong support, at least kind of an acceptability to the plans. And I think if you do that well, that does help to reduce risks further down the line, and helps to smooth the kind of plan making and design process. So I think it definitely pays dividends and is worth that extra bit of effort and a little bit of extra budget early on in the project to make hopefully make your life a little bit easier further on in the project. So those are my kind of top takeaways. So let's quickly go to questions. I've got quite a few questions here. I've got a very practical one from Alistair Southgate, who asks, how do I contact busy working parents? This is my most difficult group. Have you got any experience of that, Felicity?
Busy working parents. I think it kind of depends on the sample, like how many do you need and where anywhere in the UK, or just like, from one postcode. Probably either professional recruiter would go via, who might have expertise in that particular group, or a charity organisation that works with parents will be able to support you with that, I would say.
And Jenny asked a similar sort of question about whether you could just say a little bit more about how you recruited for the focus groups and accompanied journeys that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the focus groups on the Sheffield project, we used one main participant recruitment partner, and then we used another to support with the harder to hear voices in terms of refugees and those kinds of communities who were a charity based in Sheffield city centre. But for the bulk of the rest of the focus groups, we used a professional recruitment organisation who we provided with the sampling frame and the sampling criteria, and worked closely with them to kind of vet everybody that was coming through, so that we again made sure that we had a good representation of those from different demographic groups, transport mode users, people visiting different frequencies of the city centre, etc. So yeah, really, I think recruitment often again trips projects up, because people might assume, oh, we can recruit ourselves, or we have a newsletter, or we can just do it. It takes a lot longer than people think, and it can actually be more expensive sometimes trying to do it ourselves and not offering incentives. So it's something I haven't mentioned before, but Bear is really passionate about always offering living wage incentives to our research participants for all projects. And again, it just really helps to get research done quickly, efficiently, and get the right people through the door. So it avoids delays for sure.
That's great. It's really practical advice. Thanks, Felicity. Lisa Thames has put a couple of questions in the chat, which are a bit more around how you engage communities on things that might be coming in the future that maybe they haven't necessarily got direct experience of. So how do you talk to communities about future transport needs in relation to digitalisation, climate change impacts, maybe different future government policies? And I don't know whether you've got any experience of kind of doing that kind of engagement, I suppose, getting communities or stakeholders to think into the future and how they might respond to some of these wider changes. Quite a big question.
Yeah, great question, Lisa. Yeah, somewhat, absolutely. I think it links back to what Nicola was talking about before in terms of that co-creation piece. We've done some work with Steer, but also some work with other clients, including Westminster City Council, using more deliberative workshop techniques. So again, getting expert facilitators in the room to support with that, with designing out quite carefully a work set of workshop activities that's thinking about the future, and thinking about specific imaginaries, whether it's for a city or for a policy, etc., and what's acceptable and what's not, and that can be very useful. I found working with some deliberative experts this year in terms of where there are more controversial issues or issues where people may not agree. So climate change would be a really good example. We've worked with an expert, Steer and Bear, who supported on the assisted dying bill and doing engagement on that. So it becomes more important, I think, that sort of future looking piece when the issues might be more contentious, and it's more important than ever to actually really understand the art of the possible and really understand where compromise can be made.
Yeah, that's great. And I've seen that work really well in action around in previous role when I was at Transport for Greater Manchester, where we did sort of 2 day, a whole weekend of deliberative research around autonomous vehicles with members of the public. And that was really interesting, kind of drip feeding bits of evidence and kind of different insights into the conversation. And they came back with really kind of sensible responses about, well, automation should be supporting people, should be supporting mass transit, public transport, maybe movement of freight and goods. And they were sort of came back with really kind of clear suggestions for the sort of how you might shape from a regulatory or a policy point of view how some of these technologies come forward. So I think if you can take the time and to really take people through some of that, even if it's an area that they've not really thought about at all in the past, and I think you can come out with really useful and thoughtful contributions that help you to think about how you shape your policy going forward.
Absolutely.
Jenny Tully has asked if you've got any recommendations for resources to learn more about ethnography. Any suggestions, Felicity?
Oh, brilliant, Jenny. Yeah, I mean, feel free to contact me afterwards if you want like a full reading list. There's some brilliant books, in terms of how to write field notes or sort of learning about right now where the academic kind of practice is. Depends how kind of deep you want to dive with it. I keep being told I need to kind of write a book about doing ethnography in the transport space, which might be coming at some point in the future. That book doesn't really exist now. But yeah, there are some great kind of resources out there. Clifford is a great classic one, and Donna Haraway's book "Staying with the Trouble" kind of references what I was talking about before in terms of that turn away from the human, and kind of a lot of ethnography now, particularly in the more academic space, is looking at kind of regreening, rewilding. What about learning about kind of animals and sentience and all of this, which has links into what we're doing here, but it's not kind of directly necessarily appropriate. Academia's gone off on its little tangent over there. Yeah, if you're looking for kind of more practical decks and stuff, I do have a few of those. So yeah, feel free to contact me if you'd like to.
That's great. John Carr, I think, may have left the call, but he put in a couple of questions, one of which was around, was specifically around asking about the Sheffield work that we did and maybe the readability of things like the bus timetable and network maps. I'm guessing some of that came out of your conversations, Felicity, in terms of how easy public transport information is for people to access and use.
It did. Yes, absolutely, John. Yeah. Yes, we had 10 key themes in the end from focus groups and from the accompanied journeys. Safety was number one, but kind of reliability, particularly of buses, which kind of included a lot of comments around information reliability, was number two. And then we also sort of later down the list, we had access to information. People weren't necessarily sure where to access up-to-date live information. So yes, it was a key bugbear for sure.
Brilliant. We are just about out of time. That hour has absolutely flown by. I hope everyone who's joined us enjoyed that and has taken away possibly some new insights about participation and engagement. I'm very happy to continue the conversation outside of the call. So if you want to connect with me and Felicity on LinkedIn, please do so. And we'll be sharing the recording afterwards. So do forward it on to friends and colleagues if you think they might be interested. So thank you so much, Felicity, for joining me in this conversation today. It's been really nice chatting to you.
Thanks so much, Nicola.
I'm sure we'll be doing more work together over over the coming months. Got a few things already in development. But yeah, it's been a really great chat. And thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.